Recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. Let's go! This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie.
Welcome to episode 61 of the PR and Law Podcast, and happy Father's Day. I'm your host, Cam McMurchie, along with Ewan Christie.
Hello, Cameron.
Ewan is an employment lawyer and partner at Duntroon LLP in Toronto, Canada, and online at duntroon.law. I'm a PR guy based in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter at digitalbitspr.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend, and you can follow us on the socials, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and we're also on YouTube and SoundCloud if you prefer. And make sure you get our newsletter too. It's at PRLawPodcast.Club. Ewan, how are things? Happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Cameron. I appreciate that. I had what will probably be a Father's Day I will remember for the rest of my life, Cameron.
Why is that? What made this one so special?
Well, I got my second shot today. I've been jabbed.
Wow. Welcome to the club. You are you're officially vaccinated.
That's right. I'm fully vaxxed.
How does it feel?
Is that what you say? What do you say? It's like you're half vaxxed and fully vaxxed is, I don't know what the parlance is.
Yeah, I don't even know. I just say vaccinated. And then people say 2 shots, both. Yeah. And they go, yeah, both shots. But how do you feel? I mean, it's been, I know people feel differently when this happens because it kind of marks the end for a lot of people of this really tumultuous time.
Well, it's weird, right? Because, your whole existence for however long this has been, or actually I said that, how long it's been, and my wife immediately piped in March 20th. March 20th here was the date that everything shut down. March 20th, 2020. I mean, immediately she knew the date. So I guess that was the date, sort of the real jumping off point here. But it's surreal in that it's all of a sudden it's over. It's kind of like that's it. And I mean, I understand, I recognize there's still variants that are out there. We're still largely locked down. There are countries all over the world that are getting hit with new waves. I realize all of these things, but for your own sort of psyche, it is sort of a bizarre kind of abrupt end to something you've been anticipating for such a long time.
I mean, people have been talking about, the vaccines and getting life back to normal for so long that I haven't even really taken it very seriously, to be honest, because it feels like we're still a long way from like being back to what it was like in 2019, if we ever go back to that. But in the last few days, I've been optimistic for the first time through this whole thing. And I think we had one case yesterday that was imported, but I mean, we've gone 2 months without any cases here that happened in Hong Kong. And, there's starting to be announcements of places opening up. So Phuket in Thailand, for instance, which is not far, they're going to open up next month for tourists. If you can prove that you've got both shots, you can come in with no quarantine. Hong Kong is talking about doing the same, and I heard Canada is also talking about doing the same in July. So it looks like there's some really good news on the horizon, provided that you've got both shots.
Wow. Well, and they're not qualifying which shots you need to have. I don't know if you've heard about the whole hullabaloo that made the news here, Cam, with concert goers that had purchased tickets to see Bruce Springsteen in Manhattan on Broadway. And for whatever reason, there was an announcement that if you had a second dose of AstraZeneca as your second dose vaccine, then you were not permitted to attend the show. They were discriminating against individuals who had been vaccinated with AstraZeneca. They've since overturned the policy, as I understand. But Saturday Night Live had a similar policy that they had passed. Just kind of a bizarre move to take, but I'm curious to see if this is going to become an issue elsewhere as well.
Well, we've talked about AstraZeneca on this show. I mean, they ran into some problems on blood clots and things like that. But I have felt kind of from the beginning, they're the vaccination brand that seems to be the most questioned out of all of the main Western ones, I would say. And I don't know why that is. I mean, we looked at it when we were talking on the show about some of their communications problems early in the process, but there must be something there because it looks like, it does run into these problems. And it seems to be singled out for this kind of thing. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I really don't either. I suspected this is also going to be short-lived as well, right? Mm. I think once we sort of hit herd immunity levels in more and more countries, we're not going to be, taking concerns about whether or not you've been hit with AstraZeneca or Pfizer or Moderna. Hopefully we'll just get past it.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PRLawPodcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@PRLawPodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@PRLawPodcast.com. Or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
All right, Ewan, I understand you've got something to mark Father's Day today.
Yeah, I wanted to try and stay on topic here, Cam. And, we haven't talked about paternity leave on this show. Yeah. And it struck me that Father's Day might be an appropriate occasion to sort of hit the topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's lots of really, really good social science evidence out there of the benefits of children who grow up with a present and engaged dad, right? Things like higher IQ test scores by the age of 3, fewer psychological problems, children who are more likely to have friends and positive relationships. They've even drawn correlations between young children who had healthy relationships with fathers and their ability to earn more money later in life. So, there's a really good foundation of social science evidence here. Unfortunately, the law around the world has been somewhat slow to adopt paternity leave as a point of policy. And really, I think there's a lot of compelling arguments as to why they should.
Paternity leave is one of those subjects where I feel like if it comes up, people chime in and a lot of people have opinions on it. And then there's sort of the male machismo, which is part of it too, I think, to some degree. I know governments haven't been kind in general to paternity leave, but then there's the social stigma of it too in some countries and in some situations. But what's the situation now, Ewan?
Well, if we're looking globally, 26 of the world's richest 41 countries, Cam, offer some form of paternity leave. So, not great, not terrible, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Interestingly, Japan and South Korea have what may be arguably some of the best policies in the world. So, in Japan, men are entitled to 52 weeks leave. Their leave is tax-free and paid at 67% of wages for the first 180 days, and then 50% thereafterwards. In South Korea, men are entitled to 53 weeks of leave, and they get paid at 80% for the first 3 months, and then it drops down to 50. Here in Canada, we have a pretty decent policy, but then again, the issue here is that ultimately you're only receiving coverage of about 55% of your average insured earnings, and then the expectation is that hopefully employers will top up. And then of course there's the U.S. Well. Any of our listeners who are in the U.S. who happen to be parents, I'm sure they're very, very much familiar with the fact that the U.S. doesn't have any national federal paid leave policy, Cam, and they are in some pretty rare company in this regard. It's kind of shocking that in this day and age, they don't have any form of federal paid leave. And that goes for women as well. This isn't unique to men.
So I think there's a lot of sort of asterisks and caveats we have to give here. So first off, you mentioned that there are 94 countries, I think, that had parental leave.
Well, actually, I didn't say 94. I said 26 of the world's richest 41.
Right. Okay. So 26 of 41
paternity leave. Yeah.
Right on. Okay. So, a lot of places, and I know I've talked about this here in Hong Kong. I think I might have mentioned this before, but it's 5 days for fathers. To me, there's not much difference between having no policy and having 5 days. And I know I mean, 5 days is better than 0 days, yes, of course, but it's also not a huge bit of progress from zero. So I think that's kind of questionable, and I wonder how many of those are similar, that they're very short, which is a bit of help, yes, of course, but also not great. And then there's also whether society or culture in some of these places sort of allows you to take these days, or if there's a stigma around them as well, which I think might be a problem. I suspect in Korea and Japan, no?
Well, yeah, you got it. In Japan, just over 5% of fathers took their leave. That's it. So, I mean, they've got this wonderfully progressive policy, and only 5% of men are taking advantage of it. South Korea, you're also right. Not much better. We're looking at about 17% of men have taken it or take their leave. I mean, here in Canada, we're only talking about 24% nationally that take their paternity leave. So, which of course begs the question, why aren't men taking their leave?
Well,
Cam? Why aren't they taking it?
I just want to jump in too. Like in the US, so you're right, there's no federal policy, but I do know that companies do sometimes step up on this and give their staff some options around maternity and paternity leave. I don't think it's very good oftentimes when there's not a law backing it up. But there are people who take leave in the US, right, for maternity and paternity leave, depending on where they work, what state they're in, what company they're working for, if it's a public sector job, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make sure our listeners are clear on that. We're talking federal policies here, not necessarily how many people take leave or who gets it or who doesn't. Just that at the federal level, it's very uneven.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing whatsoever that precludes a company from offering a paid policy leave for women or for men or for non-binary individuals, same-sex couples, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing at all. The question is, do they, right? Do they? And, and even if they do, are men actually taking the leave? And again, you sort of talked about some of the stigma and, around sort of cultural and societal pressures. And I think that that's a very real issue, Cam. I mean, even if you think just culturally in terms of what we consume in terms of film, television, commercials, I mean, tell me if this sounds familiar to you. How many times have you seen this in a sitcom or a commercial? This sort of bumbling father in the kitchen who can't boil an egg.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to use the washing machine. He can't mop a floor. He just wants to sit in his lazy boy and, watch sports all day and drink beer. This is sort of a stereotype that's perpetuated a particular norm about men and fathers and the role that they're supposed to play in the household. And it's been really, really damaging. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So we've got a lot of work to do in terms of getting past that, addressing those issues. I think also, you've got to look at the boomer generation generally and the world in which they grew up in. The concept of men taking leave, a paternity leave. I mean, it was unheard of. I mean, you're talking about really the first generation of fathers who were even able to be in the room while their children were born, let alone taking some sort of leave from work. So, we've got a lot of ground to cover. I think we're making. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Ewan. It's interesting that you mentioned the bumbling father, because I did not even think about that. Like, I thought about it the other way. Like you're looking at it, and I get this, as in, like, a father doesn't think of themselves as a homemaker or being home or being involved in the day-to-day of their children this way. Whereas I think the more dangerous stigma is the one that fathers are supposed to provide and be at work and make sure that they look after everything, and that they should be strong and not take days off, not take time off. They've got to sacrifice themselves that way. And staying home with children would somehow be, there's a stigma around that. So it is interesting that you and I both thought of it differently that way, because I feel like there's just more pressure that men just aren't supposed to, stay home from work with their kids because of the career or the money earning pressure. that they feel.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think financial pressure is a huge issue here as well, right? I mean, even if you have a paid paternity leave, if you're lucky enough to live in a country that has one, let's say they're offering something like 50% of your wages. Well, can you afford to live on 50% of your wages if your employer isn't going to, we say top up, right? Which, often employers will sort of step in and say, hey, we know the government is covering, say, 50% of your wages or 55%, we'll top up the remaining, whatever. We'll say we'll throw in another 20 or another 25, 30, or maybe everything up to 100% for X number of weeks to float you. But in the absence of that, for a lot of fathers, you're absolutely right. I mean, they don't even have that option.
But even if they top up another 20%, I mean, if the father is the primary wage earner in the household, even 10% or 15% short could be the difference between being able to stay home and not, right? Like it does depend on the economics of the family involved.
Absolutely. It's a huge issue. And what's sort of interesting here when we look even if we look at Canada as sort of a case study, we're sort of looking nationally about 55% of sort of of what is kicked in by the government. And, we know that only about 24% of Canadians are actually taking the leave. But if we look at Quebec, the province of Quebec, their leave covers up to 70% of income. And when you hit that 70% threshold, something really interesting happens. Their numbers are radically different, Cam. 93% of men in Quebec take their leave at 70% of income. So you can say that's still not 100%. But if you also look at it from an employer's perspective, now you're looking at a top-up obligation that's significantly lower to sort of hit that 100% threshold to really make it advantageous for a father to take that time off. So, I think we've got to get to a place where we're getting higher levels of coverage such that there's, a little more incentive for an employer to kick in some money. Because you're right. If it doesn't work financially, it's not going to work in any other context either. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And, I've struggled with this. So I don't have kids, as you know, as I think the listeners know as well. And I have thought about it, though. Like, can I take paternity leave? Would I take paternity leave? And I have to say, like, if I'm being really frank here, I do think there is a stigma that's quite serious still. I think, Asian countries, and we touched on Japan and Korea, but I think generally across Asia, I mean, it's a deeply socially conservative society in a lot of these countries, including here in Hong Kong. And I do like I would want to take it for sure, but I do wonder about the stigma in sort of the companies I've worked in over here over the years. I don't know, because I've never seen anyone else do it. So it would be a difficult choice. And I'm very sad to say that, but it's an issue. And I think this speaks to how far we have to go in a lot of these places. I think Canada is much more sort of, I guess, enlightened in this way. And I think some other sort of socially progressive countries are, but this is going to be a challenge. Like, I don't think we're close to solving this problem. I think we're a long way away still.
Well, I agree. I mean, anecdotally, I didn't take paternity leave, and I can tell you, within my profession and doing what I do, there was a great deal of pressure for me to return to work almost immediately. I mean, I recall a conversation with a client who, when I advised her that I was, my wife and I were pregnant, she immediately said, well, what's the impact going to be on my file? We were sort of in the middle of a large piece of litigation, and that was an issue that she raised. Are you still going to be present? And clearly there was an assumption that, yes, I would. And there was certainly an assumption from counsel that I worked with that, yes, I would be present. There's a great deal of societal pressure there. And I think that needs to fundamentally shift. I think the pandemic has helped, dare I say it. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. You've certainly read numerous accounts in publications about fathers who are connecting with their children for the first time. And a lot of these fathers, Cam, they're immensely remorseful for the years that they've lost being present in their children's lives. And you know what? I think that's a good thing. It's good because that will inform their decisions going forward, and it will apply pressure on employers to adopt more progressive policies around paternity leave. And I also think that we're seeing those pressures being applied generationally. I mean, we know that Millennials and Gen Z have a very, very different approach to work than Gen X and certainly than the boomers, right? And they are pushing for more progressive policies, and paternity leave is among them, Cam. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see where we move going forward as they start to sort of move into those higher level decision-making positions.
I'm sure there are fathers out there who, just want to be in the office or don't want to be at home for whatever reason. I think there's some, but in general, like I really do believe that fathers do want to spend more time with their kids. And I just feel like society is structured in such a way where that's difficult. And it's even difficult to say or to do because of those stigmas and those pressures. So it's a tough environment. I'm glad that this is getting some attention because, yeah, you're right. I mean, you opened the segment talking about fathers being involved with their children. And that's a benefit to society overall. That's a benefit to the children. It's a benefit to how they grow and develop, as you talked about. So yeah, these are really important issues. And yeah, I think, millennials and Gen Z, they've taken a lot of these sort of broader issues and they are demanding more from their employers, not only in these ways, but many other ways. And so we are seeing things change quite quickly with the pressure from those two groups.
Two final points on this, Cam.
Yep.
The first one being that, this also can make sense financially for employers. And I think inevitably it will make financial sense for them on a long enough timeline because it will have to. The pressure will get to a place that if they want to attract and keep top talent, they will have no choice but to incorporate more progressive paternity leave policies and maternity leave policies for that matter. The second point is that when we give men an opportunity to take leave, we also provide an opportunity for women to get back into the workforce faster. And getting women back into the workforce faster translates into lower attrition rates for working mothers and an ultimate increase in terms of the gender parity and gender equality in the workforce. So that's a huge, huge benefit too. And that has large reaching financial benefits for the overall economy. So everybody will win here on a long enough timeline.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit PRLawPodcast.com. That's PRLawPodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
All right, you and I've been following a trend recently, and I think I touched on this either last week or the week before, and it's this battle between journalists and technology. And I mean technology in the broadest sense, in terms of companies, employees, founders, Silicon Valley, and other tech hubs in the world over basically how reporters are covering technology. And Ewan, have you noticed, and I think, I certainly have, but I don't know if sort of the broader public has. I assume so. But the tone of the coverage of technology in the last few years has radically changed from being optimistic and hopeful to blaming technology companies for a lot of the ills that are affecting society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at Google. Remember when Google was cool, Cam?
Yeah.
Because it was. It's hard to remember that. But once upon a time, Google was cool. Even Facebook was cool. But I don't think we're making those kinds of arguments today.
Well, yeah. And in Facebook's case, I mean, they're considered so evil at the moment. And I really think a turning point here really was the election of Donald Trump, which really drew a lot of attention to just the power of these social networks. They're impacting democracies around the world, and they're resulting in sort of sectarian violence in some countries like Myanmar. So they have a lot of power, and the tenor and the tone has shifted. In those years, and you have to go, way back into the 70s and Xerox. And it's been largely kind of fawning coverage of technology up until that point. And, this is making technology companies, a little bit antsy. They're a little bit unhappy about this, and they feel they're not getting a fair shake. And I can tell you, and I've said before, just in terms of disclosure, that I work at Tencent, which is a Chinese technology company. These companies do feel that it's getting more difficult to sort of deal with journalists. And you're familiar with Andreessen Horowitz. They're one of the large venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. They're actually not in the top 5 biggest, but they're very well known. But anyway, it's, to the point where a lot of these founders in San Francisco are even blocking journalists on Twitter. And it's really becoming a back and forth. So why am I bringing this up? Well, in January, Mark Andreessen said, you know what? Enough of this bad coverage. We're going to launch our own media organization, and we're going to tell our own story, and we're just not going to deal with you journalists anymore. And that publication came out last week. Now, at the time, Ewan, in January, they published a couple of job openings at the time, which kind of gave an indication into what they wanted to do. And they said that this publication would be, quote unquote, unapologetically pro-tech, pro-future, pro-change. But also that, quote, we are also informed optimists, not freewheeling futurists making predictions without any skin in the game. And they said they would produce content in-house and they would welcome outside writers. And, a person close to the firm at that time said basically they want a more formalized vehicle to get narratives and stories out there without having to go through the press. And so that's kind of what they set out to do. And you can see this new publication, because it was launched last week, at future.com. That's what they've called it.
All right, I'm going to pull this up. Future.com, huh?
Correct. And I have no idea what they had to pay to get that domain because I assume someone else owned it at one point.
Huh.
Anyway, if you take a look at it, it doesn't look like a fancy publication, but it's very text heavy. There's a lot of articles on there, and some of them look quite interesting. There's a lot of sort of deep dives into technology subjects and sort of where we're going. And no pictures or anything on the homepage. But you can see it's very kind of has an academic feel to it a little bit.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's no photos of any kind. Hey, I mean, you're not joking. It's strictly text. That's all that's here.
Reporters have asked Andreessen Horowitz, who is this for? What is this going to focus on? Like, what do you want to say with this website? And so, they've come out and said basically they want topics that are compelling, with a broad theme of rational optimism. So again, this optimism thing keeps coming up here, and it's something that they really believe in. They want a future-focused informational and editorial content, not day-to-day stuff. So they are looking at big picture kinds of things. They don't want to cover technology, on the day-to-day beat, the way The Information does, or the New York Times does, or Wired does. And they also said, at the beginning, and they really want to focus on sort of explainers and how to, and get people more familiar with some of the concepts in technology. And on this one, I actually agree. This comes up a lot, that, some of the technology coverage now is leaving people behind because they don't understand how it works and they don't understand the concept very well. And I think this is actually a good area for them to go into. And they have said they want to stay away from politics. Like they really want to focus on the technology, on the future. And then who is it for, Ewan? Well, they say tech people, which is very broad, and the tech curious. So I guess tech people are people, who are either in the industry or know it well. And then those who kind of want to learn it or want to get into it. And that's kind of what they're thinking of putting together. I mean, you've just glanced at it, so I'm not going to hold you to account here, but, kind of what are your impressions?
Well, I mean, I guess it's relatively clean. You've got big, bold headlines, and that's it. I mean, there's no sort of, no sort of additional text at all. It's like, here's your headline. Here's your author. I'm just clicking on something now. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's of the tech, by the tech, for the tech, right? I mean, I guess that's the idea.
The reason I want to bring this up is because this is sort of a more extreme example of what companies are going through, not just in technology, but in all kinds of forms. And, I think I've talked a bit on the show when I was at the exchange, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And, at the time that I joined there, we We had a website that was extremely basic. It didn't really work on mobile phones. There was no social networks. There was no nothing really. It was almost like a government regulatory website. But by the time I left there, we had developed a really strong content creation team. And that meant that we were writing our own articles. We were publishing our own graphs. We were publishing our own research. We were publishing a lot of material that we can go do. And the internet's been around a long time now. I mean, it's not new, but I still feel like companies largely still don't realize, the potential or the capability that they have to really get their message out and affect change. And, Andreessen Horowitz keeps saying they're going to go direct. And they mean go direct to the reader, to the consumer, and not go through the media. And this is exactly some of the things that I've sort of put in presentations that I've given over the years, that we used to have this filter that if a company wanted to get its message out, you had to go to the media, and the media you had no way to guarantee that your message would go through the media and out the other end, because they're a filter, or they could be a wall. They could just block it and say, no, we don't think this is newsworthy. We don't want to publish this, or we don't want to talk about this. Or they take what you've said and they filter and change it and kind of reconstruct it in a different context. The point being that the company just doesn't have control, right? I mean, the journalism organizations or the journalists have the control in that situation. But you don't have to go through that anymore. And to some degree, journalists are still going to cover you, and they can still do that, but you're not beholden to them in the same way, that you can go and tell your message the way that you want to. And, I am surprised in this day and age that there's still not more companies doing this. I think there's still a bit of a stigma around, well, nobody's going to take a company blog seriously, or nobody's going to take a company social media site seriously. And that's partially true, but you can get around that pretty easily. And if you've got good content, and if you're writing it in a way that's honest and true and doesn't sound like company propaganda, you can go a long way with that content. And I think, what Andreessen Horowitz are doing is really taking this to the extreme, because they are trying to sort of do this for an entire industry of technology, which, most companies obviously are not going to do. But this is something that companies can consider on a smaller scale.
I mean, I guess my question is this, though, Cam. I mean, who outside of tech circles is actually going to read this? Right? I mean, the majority of your public, anything that they consume that relates to tech, they're not consuming it because they're actively seeking it out. They're consuming it because it happens to land in, whatever sort of social media streams they look at, or particular pieces of media that they read on a day-to-day basis. I mean, unless they're specifically seeking out tech content, who outside of these circles are actually going to read this?
So you kind of answered the question in there, Ewan, which is social media. So, I mean, these guys have the website set up. There's the articles. They've got writers from outside the firm, and some of the writers are from inside the firm. So these guys are going to be, especially from outside the firm, if they get a story published on this site, they're going to be sharing it on their LinkedIn, on their Facebook, on their Twitter, on maybe even their TikTok, depending on what it is. And so that it will turn up out there. If you're clicking around social media, you very well might come across one of these stories, because the people involved in them are going to be sharing them pretty heavily, right? And that really is how most people find stuff these days. And I mean, they're very clear here. This isn't meant for sort of the everyday person, right? They said it's for tech people and the tech curious. And if you do kind of want to read about tech, and you do check things out, or you do follow a couple of people, there's a pretty good chance this is going to pop up in your feed somewhere. Just the way sort of Twitter works and the way Facebook works.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess that makes sense. I'm just looking at law as code, a legal system shaped by software. Apparently, the U.S. spends more on legal costs than any other country in the world, Cameron.
Shocking. I would have never guessed.
Makes up 2.3% of the entire U.S. economy.
Wow. Yeah. I did want to, just before we wrap this one up, Ewan, so they have 7 staffers now, which is pretty good. And the interesting thing that I think here, Ewan, is they are kind of unapologetic about what they're doing. So, obviously, this is still a venture capital firm. And so you think, well, there's kind of a conflict of interest here, is there not? And well, yeah, there is, except they don't care. They have said, like, we're going to talk about the world the way we see it, about the things that we believe in, and that's going to be their investee companies, and they just have no issue with that. And I think, in a way, that's kind of refreshing, because I don't mind this if it's declared that way, right? Like if they say, like, look, of course we have skin in the game, of course we've invested in these companies, so of course it's going to be positive or it's going to be optimistic. That's fine. Just let me know. Just let me know, and what this conflict is, and I'm fine with it. But I think, looking at what this is going to mean for journalists in general, and I read an article from Matthew Panzarino at TechCrunch, and he said basically that investigative journalists will be unaffected by this because they're the ones that dig through things, and they're going really deep into subjects, and that they might even find some of the work done on future.com helpful, in that respect. However, he said, quote, "For those who thrive on access, I'd expect a good chunk of that access to get swallowed by Future, especially for the firm's portfolio companies." And I think that's interesting because, when we talk about the media, there are different reasons. Companies at different stages in their evolution, or at different sizes or different locations, different locales, you go to the media for different reasons. And usually if you're a smaller company that's a startup, or it's at your seed round of funding, you might not get much media coverage, right? And so you really want it. You're going out there and you're trying to get your name out there in a big way. And this could change then, because if they can go to Future, if it's a Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz invested company, they can go to Future and do it there potentially. And so this could impact sort of those journalists that cover that beat, I suppose. I think that's the case that Matthew Panzarino is making.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to look at this and not, I think of a think tank, right, with a particular political bent. I mean, it's interesting that they say they're trying to keep politics out of it, and yet, I mean, the very nature of this site's existence is politically based. Yeah. So I think that's a little misleading to suggest that it isn't politicized. I mean, if your entire website is catering to a particular perspective on tech, then yeah, your business is politicized. I don't want to say propaganda. I don't want to use that word because I think it might be a little extreme, but they're certainly pushing a particular agenda, and that is most certainly politicized, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, that's true. And to be honest, and again, this is my personal view, I do think that Silicon Valley, there's some hubris there for sure, right? I mean, their technology has caused a lot of damage. It really has. It's cost lives. I mean, it's got problems like the companies that have originated there, a lot of the largest ones, particularly around social networking, it's been damaging. It's been good. I mean, there's a lot good that has come from these companies, but a lot of negative things have come too. And I feel like the world's at the point where, we're finally looking at both sides instead of just being optimistic. And I understand why Andreessen Horowitz would want to avoid the skepticism, and they don't want to be under the microscope, and they don't want critics to sort of take a look at what they're doing. But they should. I mean, that's part of an accountable society to some degree, right? And sometimes I do think they don't quite get how much damage is done sometimes by these technologies where, Facebook talks about, moving fast and breaking things. Sometimes breaking things causes real problems. And hopefully they're kind of starting to see that.
Wait a minute.
Check this out.
Whoa, hey, check this out. No, wait. Check it out.
I want you to check this out.
On the PR and Law Podcast.
What have you got, Ewan?
Yeah, Cam. So I read this great article about, did you catch the whole bit with Cristiano Ronaldo at the European Championship in his press conference and moving the Coca-Cola bottles?
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay. Well, for those who may have missed this, Cristiano Ronaldo, the Portuguese soccer phenom, sat down after a match for a press conference. Coca-Cola is sponsoring the Euro tournament. There was 2 bottles of Coca-Cola in front of him. He sort of sighed, grimaced, moved the bottles aside and said agua, and grabbed a water and proceeded to drink it, looking sort of characterizing the Coca-Cola with some disdain and level of disgust. Yes. Well, shortly thereafter, Coca-Cola's stock price dropped by $4 billion. Anyway, or so it seems.
The company's valuation dropped $4 billion.
The company's valuation dropped $4 billion. But here's the thing, and this is a Forbes story, Cam. It's called A Post-Truth World: Why Ronaldo Did Not Move Coca-Cola's Share Price. And it turns out that, sure enough, Ronaldo didn't actually have anything to do with Coca-Cola's valuation dropping during that period of time, and that there were a number of other issues. The stock had opened lower because the market was generally down in that particular day. Another fact, so Coca-Cola's shares became ex-dividend. And Cam, you can probably explain this better than I can. But in any event, Coca-Cola's market value was already down $4 billion by the time Ronaldo had his little Coca-Cola snub. So it actually had absolutely nothing to do with him sort of, snubbing the Coca-Cola bottles. So why is this important? Well, Forbes is, of course, making the argument that one particular journalist picked up the story, ran with it. It was very, very quickly duplicated. And then we ended up in this horrible sort of fake news feedback loop of everybody out there tweeting that Ronaldo had crashed Coca-Cola, when in fact that simply wasn't the case. So it's just another one of these cautionary tales, Cam, of, yes, storytelling is important, and, sort of a sexy angle to a story will get clicks, but let's make sure we're actually getting the facts accurate.
I'm glad you brought this up. Because I do feel like, everything feels politicized these days. And like what you're describing there that happened with the Coke share price, this happens a lot. This happens a lot more than people would know. It's unfortunate because if you raise skepticism of sort of news coverage or journalists, I do feel like it's a short leap from there to sort of being a Trump supporter. If you sort of believe that the media is not being, truthful, or they're not being thorough, or sort of jumping on stories that are just kind of sexy stories but aren't real, or might not be totally real. But this does happen, and we do have to be skeptical. There's so much competition out there right now, and the industry is suffering in terms of, job salaries are driven down. There's a lot of very, very young reporters working in it who are not so experienced in many cases, and these things happen all the time. And so people should be aware. And it's interesting because I actually heard it on a radio program, and I did think like that would not cause the share price to go down. Like he removed, like there's no change to Coke's sponsorship or anything. Like he just moved the Coke off the table. And I did think to myself, like, well, that doesn't sound right to me. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because it's a real thing. Okay, Ewan. Well, I've got something that's also related a bit to communications this week. It just seemed like there was quite a bit of stuff coming out. But Ewan, you're familiar with In the Heights, Lin-Manuel Miranda's film. It was a musical before Hamilton. It's kind of the one that made Lin-Manuel Miranda famous. But are you familiar with the musical and the movie?
Yes. In so much that I've read about it, I haven't seen either one.
Okay. I have seen the movie because it is on HBO Max. And it's interesting. Actually, this is a whole other subject. But HBO released it just for 1 month on HBO Max. So it's there for 4 weeks because it's also in theaters. And so this is another thing that they're trying out. Release it there, put it in theaters, but then pull it off the streaming service after a month. I'm not sure how they came up with this idea, but there it is. But Ewan, the musical, for those who don't know, it really is about Washington Heights, which is a neighborhood in New York. It's in Manhattan, north of 96th, I believe. And it's a very diverse neighborhood. A lot of people from of Puerto Rican descent, Cuban descent, Dominican descent. And the movie, it got into some hot water because of the way that the film was cast. And some people have said that it's been accused of colorism is the term. And Ewan, have you come across this term before?
Yeah, sure. But I mean, this is sort of, and look, I don't want to sort of jump in the middle of your story, but this kind of boggles my mind. I mean, like, this is the same man who made all of the founding fathers black, yes, right? For a play. I mean, how can Lin-Manuel get into sort of trouble around this issue?
Well, so colorism, in case you haven't heard this term, is where people of color with darker skin tones face further discrimination over those with lighter skin tones. And so In the Heights has come under fire for colorism. They're accused of excluding Afro-Latinos. And critics have said this doesn't accurately represent the diversity of its setting in Washington Heights. And I want to read you what Lin-Manuel Miranda said. Here's what he had to say, Ewan. Quote, I started writing In the Heights because I didn't feel seen. And over the past 20 years, all I wanted was for us, all of us, to feel seen. I'm seeing the discussion around Afro-Latino representation in our film this weekend, and it's clear that many in our dark-skinned Afro-Latino community don't feel sufficiently represented within it, particularly among the leading roles. I can hear the hurt and frustration over colorism, of feeling still unseen in the feedback. I hear that without sufficient dark-skinned Afro-Latino representation, the work feels extractive of the community we wanted so much to represent with pride and joy. In trying to paint a mosaic of this community, we fell short. I'm truly sorry. I'm learning from the feedback. I thank you for raising it, and I'm listening. I'm trying to hold space for both the incredible pride in the movie we made and be accountable for our shortcomings. Thanks for your honest feedback. I promise to do better in my future projects, and I'm dedicated to the learning and evolving we all have to do to make sure we are honoring our diverse and vibrant community. And I just want to say, Ewan, when I went through this, and I'm a fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda. I have seen Hamilton on Broadway as well, not with him in it, but it's a fantastic musical. I had a hint of a feeling of the Cultural Revolution reading this in terms of the language that he used here. And I think that he wrote this very well, honestly. I think this is it flows very smoothly. I think he addresses all of the key points, but it also sort of the self-flagellation. I do feel like I understand where that's coming from, and I understand it's important in some cases. But sometimes I feel it just goes a bit overboard. And I felt that way a little bit with this here. And I wonder how we will look at this sort of decades in the future. And I don't know if this is effective or not. I think in Lin-Manuel Miranda's case, I think it really is from the heart. I mean, he's Latino himself, partially. So, but it is interesting in terms of text and in terms of reviewing this and the public nature of these kinds of apologies. It's going to be something we look back on differently, I suspect. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. Particularly in situations like this where you have an individual who is an ally, right? And I mean, these are very, very real issues. I mean, let's not mince words there. But I mean, could the concern not be better addressed at individuals that are in no way supportive of, art, culture, film, television that is reflective of the communities from which they originate? I mean, this sounds like an individual who has gone to great lengths to try and accurately reflect. And to his own admission, he's come up short. But I mean, he's making an effort. Now, I'm not saying that means, hey, you're
that's enough. Yeah, exactly.
In its entirety. I mean, I think everybody would agree. Yeah, okay, look, we all have to do more in this regard. But you would think that sort of anger, frustration, vitriol. And again, I'm not familiar with the story, so I don't know what the pushback was. But you think it could probably be better addressed at all kinds of stories that make no attempt whatsoever to sort of accurately reflect the communities from which these stories originate, rather than Lin-Manuel Miranda. I mean, I don't know. Something just strikes me as off here,
Yeah, you're right. And that doesn't mean that he's off the hook. Like you say, like it's everyone has room to improve, right? But you are making a good point, though. Like, there are people out there who are way further behind in that process than Lin-Manuel. And especially, I had seen the controversy before I had watched the film. So I actually watched the film yesterday thinking that, there must be a lot of either white people in here or not very dark-skinned people. But I don't think there was one white person in the whole movie, actually. And a lot of it's in Spanish, too. It's, like you say, he's more of an ally. We're almost out of time here, Ewan. So just really quickly, I want to mention one more. It's in the Daily Beast. It is titled Sex, Deceit, and Scandal, The Ugly War Over Bob Ross's Ghost. We don't have time to get into it, but I recommend this read. You remember Bob Ross, Ewan, the guy?
Oh, of course I remember Bob Ross.
Yes. This is fascinating. You have no idea what's been happening with him since he passed away and his estate. It is insane. So check that out, too.
Okay, maybe we should do our outro, Cameron, in a Bob Ross-like voice. Calm, quiet, reserved.
Like, I watched it, but never on purpose. Like, it was either on.
I agree with you.
Like, I feel like I've seen a lot of it, but I never once turned on Bob Ross. Like, it was either on or I don't know how it ended up there, but I've seen a lot of them. That's for sure.
Yeah, except that it's mesmerizing, right? It was one of those, you're flipping through and you land on it. And it's like, I don't know. It's like a deer in the headlights, a moth to a flame, Cam. It's just, you can't turn it off. There's something that's transfixing about it.
Yeah, I was going to use that word, transfix.
I don't know what it is, or it's his voice. Is there something in his voice? Has he been trained by like some secret operative to, mind control people with his, calm and reflective tones? I don't know. There's something going on.
The fact that it's his tone, he's very soft, and it is like a hypnosis kind of thing. But he's also painting usually a nice landscape, right? And so you're watching very slowly, like stroke by stroke on his brush, like trees appearing and mountains, and he's also talking softly. So it is very, like, you can get carried away in that. I think you forget everything else going on in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to put on some Bob Ross right now.
I was just thinking I should put this on. Sounds good. Anyway, thank you for joining us again this week. Geez, we debated all kinds of stuff today. And happy belated Father's Day for me, but happy Father's Day to you and all the other fathers out there as well. Don't miss a show. Please subscribe in your podcast app of choice or in our YouTube and SoundCloud channels and social media, of course, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And make sure you sign up for our newsletter, which we changed a bit, and we're looking to improve. PRLawPodcast.Club. So for you and Christy, this is Cam McMurchie. Light it up.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PR Law Podcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.